Fantastic. That was great. Man, I was just all smiles over here. I love it. I love it. Love great music. Thank you so much for being on the show, everybody. Really appreciate it. We're going to have a great time today. And I want to basically just introduce everybody real quick here. So, you just heard, okay? First of all, this is the TLQ. So, Trevor Lawrence over here on saxophone. He's playing tenor and soprano today. And how are you, Trevor?
Good, thank you, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for being on the show. Over here on the piano, Masumi Yamamoto.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Thank you.
And here on the vocals, the one and only, the great Dr. Ric Wilson from Mandrill.
Hey, Dan. Good to be here on the Now Man show.
Oh, that's great. Now is the time.
That's right.
And over here on the congas, another Wilson brother from Mandrill. We got the Wolf Man. How are you?
How you doing?
Fantastic. I'm glad you could come. And sounds great. Fantastic. And then over here on the drums, Peter Buck.
Yes, good to be here.
Thank you for coming. Is there anything that you'd like to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just great to be here. I met Rick through a mutual friend, a vocalist named Barbara Morrison, and it turns out that one of my very best friends in the world, Eli Brueggemann, played with keyboards with Mandrill, and Doc Rick and I, we really hit it off as a partnership, so it's finally coming around where he and I got a chance to work together, and he thought that this would be a great opportunity with Trevor, to really put something together.
Fantastic. I love being able to bring people together and make these kinds of magical moments happen. That's awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Yeah, my pleasure. And please come back. Yeah. And over here, last but not least, on the big old stand-up bass,
Michael Saucier.
Saucier. Now, is that French?
Yes, it is, but I'm not French.
That's interesting. Well, I have a Swiss-German name, and I'm not Swiss-German. Well, I am, but you know how that is. I am, but I'm not. So, how long have you been playing the bass?
This particular instrument about 15 years.
Oh, so you also play the electric bass too?
I do.
Do you play all styles?
As many as I can.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Now Man Show. Really appreciate. And tell me your last name again.
Last name is Saucier. It's New Orleans French.
I love it. Is that where you're from?
My father's from New Orleans.
Awesome, awesome. I still need to get there. I'm looking forward to that. So let's hear some more from TLQ, Trevor Lawrence, and Masumi Yamamoto right now.
so wonderful. So they say. The thing that's known as romance is wonderful. So wonderful. So they tell me. I can't recall who said it. I know I never read it. I only know they tell me that love is grand. If there's a moon up above, it's wonderful, wonderful in every way. So they say. You leave your house one morning and without any warning, you find yourself shouting that love is grand. To hold your girl in your arms is wonderful, wonderful in every way. So they say. Thank you, guys.
A lot of people, even younger people, when they get exposed to the older music, they get an education about another time when there was a lot of incredible music that was being made.
I mean, that's the interesting thing. Something like Spotify, for example, I was rejecting the Spotify for many, many years. I didn't take it on at all. And then I got featured on a very prominent playlist by a friend of mine who's prominent in the industry. And I just had to get on there to see what was going on. And of course, then I discovered I've got one of my songs is over 250,000 streams, which isn't a lot in context of today, but it seemed like, how did that happen? I don't know. I don't get the Spotify thing, because we don't get paid.
Right, exactly.
I think I made $70 in total through all my Spotify streams forever, which must add up to 500,000 at least.
Oh yeah, it's crazy how that works.
Yeah, and it seems totally useless to have stuff, but people see it now as a shop front, where you just get people interested, and it's attention that you're trying to find, and then the attention you try to get people, like, for example, my live streams, the Bowie live streams. I mean, obviously I have a Bowie platform, which a lot of people don't have, so I feel very blessed and honored that people don't go, you should stop doing Bowie because you're awful, because apparently I'm not awful.
You're not. You're wonderful.
Thank you. But using that, I get tips. People are prepared and happy to give me tips, but it's getting their attention for them to come and be interested in being a part of that experience, and that's really important. So Spotify, stuff like that, is about bringing attention, and then we have to learn as artists to monetize that attention, and whether that be selling t-shirts. Now, of course, nobody needs t-shirts, because you can buy 50 t-shirts at $2 each wherever. But what they're trying to do, what we have to learn to do, Dan, in my opinion, is monetize aspects of what we do, and understand that people who support us and love and believe in what we do, and the brand that we have to create nowadays as a musical entity, they will support us in the sort of patron way. Spotify doesn't necessarily throw a lot of back end at us.
That's true. Well, that's kind of how the system is set up, whether we like it or not. So we have to. I don't like the word compromise. I don't believe that word. But we have to work around what we can. And some of us are obviously ethical, and we won't do anything just to be doing it.
Right.
So there is that balance, and you're right. We have to take, the business side of this much more seriously, especially nowadays, I think, because it does require thinking more outside the box. And there's also, I think, for me as an educator as well, as a producer of different kinds, it's important to create content for the younger generations as well, to understand that there was a period of time before they were on this planet, and not that long ago, where there were incredible, people call them music invasions, that just changed the world, much like, the classical musicians of that period changed the world.
Right, Shostakovich and Scriabin, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's Beethoven, even, Wagner. These big bombastic
Chopin and Liszt, and just the list goes on for me. Just sorry. But and Liszt, also too was one of the first of his kind as a performer.
He's a rock star.
He was a rock star. He was one of the first, if I'm not mistaken, to turn the piano sideways so the women could see his profile while he was playing.
Right.
And that was totally different, because most of the time, the keyboard player, just played a very docile kind of role, and the music was the star, right?
Right.
And that changed. I think Amadeus was a great film to also educate people about how some things maybe haven't changed when it comes to comparing excellence with mediocrity, because I think there is a lot of that. There always has been. I mean, even as a kid, there was pop music that sometimes made it on the radio that I thought was kind of mediocre. I mean, it may have had maybe a catchy little tune, but it really, in comparison to the other recordings, other artists, it couldn't stand up to that, in my experience.
A very interesting anecdote is I had a bet with my friend. The stake was a concert ticket, right? And then we were very poor. We were in university. No, sorry, I just finished university. Went down to London, and we were living in this hovel, terrible place. And I was living with the bass player in my band, and I bet him a concert ticket to see this band that they would not reach number one. And the band that reached number one and kept them off the number one spot was Hanson. And
Really?
The song that was kept off the number one spot by Mbop by Hanson was Paranoid Android by Radiohead.
Wow.
I mean,
I know. Yeah, I'm sure they're nice people. See, that's the thing, is that, there's a lot of nice people out there, and they're very talented. They do understand how to, at least the basics, which is important. Mike Garson and I talked about how, even in avant-garde music, you can't just sit down an instrument and just make noises. There really is an art to it. You really have to understand the basics.
right.
Even when you make noise, so to speak, like Sonic Youth or whatever, you have to understand that, right? And so, and obviously, some people are more trained than others. I come from a background of combination of experimental and the music theory, in the traditional sense, both. So I'm a slow reader, but I can read very, very slowly. But I just felt that, when I was in school, my teacher said to me, "You really don't want to learn how Mozart created music, do you?" I'm like, "No, not really." I want to understand how I love Mozart, but I want to understand how I can do this for me.
Sure.
And
You're punk rock.
yeah, that's basically what it is. But it a lot of times punk rock doesn't, you get associated with sophistication. But I remember Steve Jones saying once on his show that he would play Tony Bennett and he'd get flack for it, on his show, and he basically would say, "Well, I'm a punk rocker and I can't like Tony Bennett. Doesn't make any sense, We're musicians."
Listen to the Buzzcocks and the Stranglers. They're punk rock,
right?
But they have very, very great sophistication. I mean, even Depeche Mode. I mean, it's punk electronic music. Their punk aesthetic applies to complexity and beautiful nature. It's like punk rock is, the aesthetic is not about being bad at your instrument. It is about using the instrument to convey something that is not conventional.
That's right.
As the fashion is, like, just because you have a safety pin through your nose does not make you a punk. You can be an idiot, a moron. You can be a complete misogynist, racist, and wear a safety pin. Doesn't not make you a punk rocker, because you're missing the point and all those things. I love John Lydon is a divisive figure.
Yeah,
a lot of commentary on what being punk is.
Yes,
and the punk ideology and the punk ideas that came out of the Malcolm McLaren plan and all that sort of stuff is based around, it's a very philosophical and intellectual approach that was then adopted by fashion brands. And as soon as you get punk being a fashion thing, like on the cover of Vogue, these punks, they dress up these very conventional looking people in conventional unconventionality, and it's then you've lost the spirit of it completely. And the spirit is about owning your own narrative outside of convention. And I'm not a punk rocker in sound or sonics in any sense. I'm very trained musically, but my aesthetic psychologically could be seen as punk. I don't want to fit a box. I don't want to be pigeonholed in any way, and I feel like that's like what you were saying about Margalef. Margalef is a punk producer, and he's worked with some punk bands, but Stevie Wonder is about as far from punk as you can imagine.
And Joan Baez, yeah.
Joan Baez, absolutely. But Margalef did a Gua record. You just told me something I didn't know. That's pretty punk rock.
That's pretty punk rock. Don Randy I had on the show, who was one of the Wrecking Crew pianists. I went through his list of credits and I saw the Tubes. And I brought that up in the interview, and he he mentioned he's just kind of smiled real big, like, and so there's that. The Wrecking Crew guys really kind of had, in my view, had this kind of punk rock vibe to them, where they were rebellious because they were coming in, even though they knew how to read music and they were very talented, and just like their predecessors were in the big band era that were starting to, people like Barney Kessel that were starting to leave the industry, at least the studio recording industry for other artists. They were the new kids, right, coming in,
Sure.
and they definitely had a punk rock, kind of what we would now call a punk rock mentality. And some of those stories, from people that Denny had talked to, plus Don Randy himself told me, like, hilarious, right? Very, very rebellious, I should say. You're going against the norm, and they created incredible music at a time when bands had to be focusing on getting their marketing strategy together, getting their live acts together, and they didn't always have time. Like in the case of the Beach Boys, they didn't have time to get all the other guys. Brian Wilson didn't have time to get all the other guys up to speed, right? So he had to immediately reach out to these guys in the studio. And that was such an incredible story, and I'm so glad that I got to experience that story firsthand, with some people.
I think Brian Wilson was very punk rock, even though his music is incredibly easy listening.
Let's wrap this up. And again, Julian, it was great to be able to talk to you again, and thank you so much for opening up the time. And
I'm sorry we're not in the office where Bukowski wrote his books.
I know, that's where Kill Radio was, the internet radio show, last time we were together. So let's try to continue this conversation, and maybe in person. And again, thank you so much, Julian Shah Tayler. And this is Dan Nowman Niswander, and you're watching the Nowman Show. And always remember, stay present in the moment now.
The past is gone, the future is yet to come. It's now, right now. The present is here, the future is near, but it's right now. Being with you makes the party complete. So keep the body moving and shows your happy feet. At the end of the night, when all is said and done, I wanna know I did the right thing.